we do bring in the 7-time Hall of Famer, the man, the myth, the legend, the greatest that's ever done it. Peter Maher joins us. And Pete, I was going to just step all over myself and talk about Jerome McGinley and Craig Conroy, but I'd rather you do it because it'll come with a greater sense of authority and purpose. But I like this. I mean, why wouldn't you want Jerome McGinley? But I like it because of who the two guys are. Because there are going to be some really heated conversations because those two have really heated conversations.
They do, and then they walk away smiling at each other, having solved the problem or potentially solved the problem. No, I think it's outstanding that Jerome is coming back into the Flame fold as the executive assistant or assistant to a special assistant to GM Craig Conroy. I think it's just an absolutely outstanding decision on the part of the team. Now, he's not going to be able to be here on a full-time basis this year. He's going to be coaching his son's team in Kelowna, and then I'm almost certain that after this year he'll be on full-time here with the Flames. Yeah. But knowing Jerome, I'm sure that as often as he can get to be around the Flames, he's going to do that this coming season. And he's going to be very, very helpful to the management, to the coaches, and to the players. And I think just having him around the players is going to be a real positive influence. Going back to the fact that I was able to have the privilege of seeing him play every game that he played with the Flames, every goal that he scored and all of that stuff, but even more so, seeing how he reacts off the ice. I mean, he was available for interviews after every single game. The Flames could have lost a game 10-0. Jerome would stand out in front of the media and do an interview. It didn't matter whether he had a good night, medium night, or a bad night. He was always available. And he's always had that, I know, talking to players that were around him, that in the dressing room, he was a very serious guy, but he has that upbeat personality about him that I think is going to be very infectious to the players on this Flame team when they see how Jerome is and how accessible he is to fans. I mean, I don't know how many times that when the Flames were on the road, that the bus would be held. He would come out of the hotel 10 minutes before the bus was to leave, or maybe 15 minutes before to leave, to sign autographs for the fans that were in front of the hotel where the team was. And he'd come out there and sign them, get on the bus. And sometimes the bus had to leave a little bit late while Jerome signed those. He would do that after games as well. And the night that really stands out for me was back in 2004, the night the Flames won the Western Conference Championship, or whatever it was called then, beating San Jose in Game 6. I remember, Rob, you and I were doing, with Mike Rogers and others, doing the post-game show in the Hot Stove Lounge. And we went on there for about an hour and a half. And I remember going outside after. It was raining, but there was Jerome in the middle of the parking lot in the back end of the Saddle Dome where the players parked their cars. He was surrounded by a bunch of kids. He was not only signing autographs for them, but he was asking them questions. How are you doing in school? And things like that. Yep. And, that was a night for celebrating. And I'm sure that Jerome eventually caught up to his teammates. But he had time for these fans and to sign autographs and ask them questions and that sort of thing on a night when it was a big celebration for the team. So, and also, the way he played the game is going to be something that's going to be very helpful to the Flames. So it's outstanding he's back in the Flame organization. You have to wonder if maybe more Flames alumni will end up being part of the coaching staff. But, you've got Alex Tanguay as coaching history, and he and Jerome also are pretty good friends. Because they were line mates with the Flames earlier on. And also another guy is Mark Savard, who played with Jerome back in the early 80s before he got traded. He has a coaching experience. So it's going to be real interesting to see what's going to develop here with the Flames. But having Jerome on board again is just absolutely phenomenal.
So two things. One, I want to try and thread a bit of a needle here, Pete. So I'm going to call on you for a little bit of help with this. When you talk about how Jerome dealt or would make himself available to the public, it's important people understand he didn't seek that out. That was not what he did. And if he was probably, given sodium pentothal, he'd probably tell you that, I really don't want to, I'd rather just go be that. Am I saying it the right way, Pete? Like he did it because
you're absolutely right.
He's the leader of that team.
The spotlight. Yeah, he did not want the spotlight, but he knew that as being one of the top players on the team, and especially after he became captain, that it was a necessity for him to be available to the media. And we've had players in the past, not only with the Flames, but a number of teams, not even talk to the media after games, even if they're captain of the team. when things haven't gone wrong. But Jerome always was there. I mean, he never tried to hide or anything like that. And it wasn't because he wanted the publicity. In fact, he probably would have been better if he did in the back room of the dressing room, changing and showering and getting ready to go out for the evening. But he always made himself available and was always one of the last Flame players to leave the dressing room, because he always did some off ice work after games as well in the Flames training center in the dressing room. But he never wanted charity. He never wanted the publicity, but he knew that it was incumbent upon him to be there to speak out on behalf of the team when the team won or lost or tied a hockey game. So he's just an outstanding guy. And there are times I've seen him be a bit shy, but he knows that it's important. He knew it was important to him as a character to be accessible to the media, to the fans, and all of that sort of thing. It was he and Lanny McDonald pretty much are two of the only players that I ever saw. And of course, I was with Lanny when he was in Toronto, and here when he was with the Flames. They always would hold up the bus. Well, these guys signed autographs, even though the team was scheduled to leave at such and such a time. There were players there, there were fans there that wanted autographs, and those two guys always signed them all. So now we got both of them in the organization. Lanny's not on the management group, but he's part of the Flames alumni, very prominent around the Saddledome all the time. So I think this is going to be really good, having another addition, Jerome McGinley, being in the crowd as well.
So now I got a third point. So let me go to the third point, and I'll come back to the second point in a second. The third point was I was ecstatic that they recognized the alumni in the room, which they've done before. But I was ecstatic when Ryan Huska was introduced that the alumni were there. They were mentioned. They were part of the story. Huska talked about meeting Colin Patterson, and I was later informed the next day by Colin Patterson that a 11-year-old Craig Conroy met Colin Patterson too. So Patter was an early influence on both the head coach and general manager of the Calgary Flames. But it made me I like it, Pete. We've got the best alumni in the National Hockey League, and that they should be front and center with this group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Flames alumni, I mean, I'm probably being a little bit biased here, but I believe the Flames alumni is the best organized alumni in the entire National Hockey League. I mean, Edmonton, you hardly hear anything about the Edmonton alumni. In fact, when they try to have some of these softball games and golf tournaments in the summer in Red Deer and invite the Flames alumni and the Oilers alumni, there's a lot more Flames alumni there than there are Oilers alumni. So it's a real tribute to how positive and how effective the Calgary alumni has been, not only in supporting the current team, but also in the many, many things they do for the various charities throughout the city of Calgary and surrounding areas. I mean, there are all kinds of things that don't get much publicity, but are helpful to various organizations and charity groups within our city on behalf of the Flames alumni. They just pick it up right where the Flames hockey team also is very active in giving out donations and helping out in charities and that type of thing. And the alumni follows right through. And the alumni is always there. If there's a guy on the team that wants to talk to an alumni guy, they always make themselves available to go in there and encourage them to help make them better or anything, that question that they would have. So, yes, it was very nice of Ryan Huska that day that he was announced as coach of the team to recognize the Flames alumni and the many of the guys that were there in the background. The media, of course, were always in the front, as it should have been, but the alumni guys were in the back showing support for the naming of the new Flame coach, who was up on the podium there with the new general manager, Craig Conroy, who's also, of course, a member of the Flames alumni.
Okay, so now go back to the point, my second point. Because the title is the same, when Craig Conroy retired, he became special assistant to the general manager for Jay Feaster. Is that the blueprint for what we should expect for Jerome? Because Craig did a little bit of everything, didn't he? He was on the ice for practices. He went down to the mine. Now, you've already established he's, year one, Jerome's going to be coaching his son and in Kelowna. But do we expect him to kind of have those, roles in all the different departments to try to get acclimatized?
I would guess so, Rob. I would think that he's going to be very active in that sort of thing with the Flames, even going on the ice with the players, following pretty much in the role that Conroy did when he was appointed about 11 years ago to that the same position, special assistant to the general manager. He also had some other titles there, but I think the same thing is going to be done with Jerome, and I think that's going to be extremely positive because Jerome, as I was mentioning earlier, the character that he is, it's going to help rub off on some of the players, and he can also show them some of the little tricks that he had when he was playing the game. So I expect him to be, when he can be around the team and be very, very on the ice, off the ice, and also probably go down and check out with the minor league team is here in Calgary, so he doesn't have far to go.
He doesn't have to go very far, no.
So I expect him to be very, very active in all areas with regard to the team, time permitting. Now, obviously, this year he's not going to have as much time as he will have in the future. I firmly believe he's going to have a full-time job here after this season. But as you mentioned, he's coaching his son's team there in Kelowna, and I think that's going to take the number one priority. But I'm knowing Jerome, I know he's going to get here a lot more than you might expect, even though he has those other potential other situations that he's dealing with in Kelowna. But I know him; he will be around this team quite a bit and will be most helpful. I'm sure he'll make the odd road trip when he can, also, and that will be another way for him to show the players how they should act, and have a little bit of pointers with them, always in a positive vein.
I do like to show attribution wherever I can, but I have to apologize to our peers because I can't remember who got the quote from Craig Conroy, but Conroy talked yesterday about having someone in the room that will push back. And I thought that gave a little insight into what kind of leader he is. And by pushback, I mean, if they're talking about a player, you don't have to agree with me. Push me on it. And I always think that's and I think Brad Treliving was that way. I think Craig Conroy's just maybe picking it up from him. But I thought that was a little insight on what to expect in an administration run by Conroy. Is there will be healthy debate.
Yes, and I think you're going to see a situation where Coach Huska and Coach Conroy will have a lot more interaction than Daryl Sutter did with Brad Treliving, particularly in the second season here when there seemed to be a big fallout there along the way in the internal, not only between manager and coach, but among the players. I'm still a guy that felt that some of the players should have been able to put out a little bit better effort to at least get themselves in the playoffs, even though they had their difficulties or disinterest with the coach. But anyway, that's gone now, so they're going to stepping ahead in a new forum. I do expect Conroy and Huska to have a chat at least once a day, and probably more than that to discuss things. The manager makes the moves to get the players, but he generally always goes to the coach and says, "Well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? You think we should make this deal or not make this deal," and that sort of thing. So I think we're going to have a lot more of that, and also you're not going to have a situation where you're going to have the players involved in that sort of thing. But I think there's going to be more conversation between the coaching staff, management, and the players on the team, and I think that's going to lead to a very positive atmosphere with the Flames, and hopefully that carries out on the ice to have a team have a great success this next season. So I kind of like the positive upbeat with the people now that are around the team in the high managerial positions, starting with Maloney and Conroy, and now McGinley's in there, and there's a whole bunch of others in there who are also very well adapted to having that type of atmosphere. So I think it's all positive the way things are going right now for the Flames.
Pete, last weekend and early part of this week belonged to Ryan Huska. He becomes the 24th coach for the Calgary Flames. Thoughts on Ryan Huska, what you heard from him, what you've seen from him so far, but also, going with a first-time NHL head coach. Lots of time in the minors, right? But
yeah. I don't know him very well. I met him a couple of times, had brief conversations with him, but he struck me as wearing a very positive, upbeat kind of guy in those very short sessions that I had with him. My only thing, and it goes back to something we talked about the last time we was on this show, is that where you're promoting an assistant coach into the head coaching role after Daryl Sutter has been the coach. And we all remember, well, at least you and I remember, and I'm sure a number of other people do as well, when Daryl stepped down as coach to concentrate being fully on general manager in 2006 and appointed Jim Playfair as the head coach of the team. Jim had been the top assistant or associate coach with Daryl for the number of years that he was coaching the Flame team. And then when Jim came in, of course, he was the guy when he was assisting Daryl who would go to the players and have to pat them on the back after and build them up again after Darryl had kind of knocked them down a peg or two. And then, of course, Jim came in as coach, and he didn't have the same approach as Darryl. He wasn't nearly as hard on them as Darryl was, but he had to have a stronger stance on them. And I know there were players on the team that came to me and said, we don't know who this guy is. Last year, we thought, in the year before that, we thought that he was he was a nice guy, a good guy, our friend. And now he's in here and he's yelling this, yelling that, and not in a and that sort of thing. So that's the only thing I'm a little bit concerned about. And I know Craig Conroy was part of that team in 06, 07. He came back to the Flames late in that season, so he would have seen some of that atmosphere that was there with the team. And of course, after Jim had coached the team for 1 year, he was replaced as head coach, and Mike Keenan came in as the head coach, which was another move, was not particularly great. But, then Jim went back to being an assistant coach of the team, and he was the guy that was basically drawing up the game plans for the team. And Mike was the guy that was, I had players on the team come to me and say, Mike Keenan knows nothing about hockey. Yeah. And I tended to say, well, gee, he's won a Stanley Cup, and he's been to the finals like 4 times or whatever it was. They said all he does is he badgers us all the time, and not in a Badger Johnson type of way.
No.
And but anyway, that's my little thing that I'm a little bit concerned about. But hopefully that's not going to be the case here. And but this guy has certainly earned his right. 9 years in the organization with the farm team, and then the last 5 years with the Flames. So he certainly has earned the right to be a head coach in the National Hockey League with this team, given his yeoman service to it. And I'm sure that it's been pointed out to him the things that happened in the past with regard to what we talked about there earlier when replacing Darryl. And I'm sure he'll be cognizant of that once he starts greeting the players when he probably meets with them either by phone or Zoom or personally over the off season here, and then when they get here for training camp in September.
I wonder, Pete, how much a difference it makes that it's Darryl moved up and became general manager, and Jim moved under Darryl. In this case, Craig comes in and Ryan moves up. I wonder if that has, if that's kind of different or makes any kind of difference.
Yeah, it does make it a little bit of a difference for sure. No question about that, because Darryl was always around, and he probably was pushing Jim a little bit too to be, a bit of a hard guy with his players to get the maximum out of them. So that's not going to be the case this time. And as we talked about earlier, he's got some very positive people in the management group there that are going to be encouraging him as he goes along. So, perhaps we won't have a similar situation to what we had in 06, 07 with this type of coach. And, you hear the commentaries from some of the players now, Anderson, Rasmus Anderson certainly has had some interesting comments about when Huska was coaching him in Stockton or in the American Hockey League or wherever it was he was coaching him. And he was not in shape and all of that sort of thing. But the Flames had high hopes for him, and the Huskers took him under his wing and was very hard with him. But he taught him how to be disciplined and how to get himself into shape. And he's become one of the top defensemen on the team, if not one of the top defensemen in the NHL when going forward. I think this guy has a tremendous potential. So, have that as a positive situation. And the guys that he worked with last year and the year before and the year before that, on the coaching staff, the other players on the team all seem to be very high in their praise of the work of Ryan Huska and the way that he approached them and the way that he handled things as a assistant coach with the team, particularly the defenseman, which he was primed for, and penalty killing and that type of thing. So, there was all kinds of positives out there right now, and now you get into training camp. Hopefully it will stay that way. I mean, there's going to be some times when he's going to have to be tough on them, but that's all part of getting the maximum out of players. But hopefully it doesn't have a negative effect on them.
One of the things we can expect is there will be a captain on this team in this coming season. I don't get a vote. I'd like to see Michael Backlund become that captain. But since the last time we spoke, we found out that Backlund one of 3 finalists for the King Clancy Award.
Yeah, and very worthy of that. Hopefully he will win that award when they have the presentation in Nashville. Was it next week or the week after?
Yeah.
And he certainly is at least deserving of it for his entire time I was here when he first joined the Flames, and even then I knew how you could see how much of a person he was with regard to looking out for others. And he's done an awful lot of community work in Calgary, and I'm sure you probably know more about it than I do, Rob, since I've been on the sideline from that sort of thing, or at least not as active as I used to be. But I'm sure you can vouch for the fact that he's made himself available for so many great charity events and helping out other people. And I know he helped me out as a broadcaster from time to time. There'd be some issues that nothing major, but you'd ask him about something and he'd be very helpful with that. And from what I can gather, was also continued on doing that in his last bunch of years with the team as well. And the fact that he won the award named as a good guy award named in my honor, which I don't know why they call me a good guy, but anyway, that's another story for another day. But the media voted him as the co-winner of that award this year. And as they say, he's a guy that's always been another guy, like we talked about Jerome. This is a guy that always made himself available to the media, win or lose. So hopefully he can get that King Clancy award and follow in the footsteps of Lanny McDonald, Joe Nieuwendyk, and Jerome McGinley, who are past Flame winners of that King Clancy award. And, I got to know King Clancy quite well when I was working play-by-play with the Maple Leafs at that time. King Clancy was kind of the right arm or left arm of Harold Ballard. They would go everywhere together. And King was a very, very positive, fun, offbeat guy to be, and always a giving guy. He was another guy that was always available for charities, for fans, and all that type of thing. And so the adapt that they have this award named after King Clancy, and hopefully Michael Backlund can have his name on that trophy next week.
Well, for the record, nobody asked me, but I was going to suggest the Peter Maher Bonesaw Award, but they didn't. Nobody asked me. Just on Michael, he and his wife Frida really, in many ways, have picked up the gauntlet that Mark Giordano and his wife Lauren put down, and others, and that would go all the way back to Lanny and Ardell. They're both so giving. One of the friends in the groups that I work with, Parachutes for Pets, they've absolutely been incredible and have been the biggest ambassadors and have done so much for them. Special Olympics, he's always at Special Olympics events and hosting Special Olympians. But I personally, again, you have personal stories. I go back to my first Control F camp. He was our first guest, and he came out and signed autographs for all the kids at the camp and took pictures and everything like that, and did it with a smile, and just exactly what we were talking about with Jerome, 20 minutes ago. So there is a through point there, I would say, Pete. There is a through point.
Yes, there's no question about that. He is deserving of being a finalist for that award, and hopefully he can edge out a couple of other guys there that
Anders Lee and
yeah, those are the two other guys. So hopefully he can edge them out and win the award. Of course, we can't speak much for those other two guys, not being around them, but we can certainly have high praise for the work that Michael Backlund does above and beyond the game of hockey, and very deserving of at least being a finalist and hopefully the winner.
Busy times ahead for the Calgary Flames. We're in that crazy season. The Stanley Cup Finals over. We'll get to that in a second. But ahead of the draft, we know about free agency. We know about free agency next year. So we're already talking about players who aren't free agents this year but could be next year. Pete, we're starting to hear some Flames names in the news.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be some resolutions to this situation, I would say, in the near future. The Flames have 7 players who going into the final year of their contract, so they can be given extensions or can be offered extensions, and if they want it, or they can sign them, and if not, then it's going to create a big decision within the Flame camp. And you talk about Michael Backlund. He's one of those players in that group. Even though he's played his entire career with the Flames here, there's no guarantee that he will be a Flame forever, although it would be nice if that could be the case. Elias Lindholm is another centerman who is in that situation. And he might be the prime one right now because the team is really anxious to have him signed to a long-term contract extension. And, at the exit meetings of the players, he was a little bit tentative as to whether or not he would be returning. And I think what needed to happen was get the general manager in place and then get the coach in place. And then you can approach the players, because then at least you know what your staff is going to be. And I think that's important in those guys determining whether or not they want to come back to the team. So hopefully those signings of Conroy as the general manager, and even with Jerome coming into the camp, and then of course Ryan Huska as the coach, they're certainly aware of them. And now it's the fact that the GM, the management team, have to go after them and find out just exactly what these guys feel with regard to having contract extensions. Others in that group are there's Toffoli and Dubé and Hanifin, Tanev and Zadorov. And, if these guys are not going to, if you offer them all deals and they don't agree to them and won't sign, then I think you've got to move them now. Like you have to move them in the summer, like either at the draft or soon after that to get full value for them. Because some people will say, well, why don't you just wait and see how things are going at the trade deadline? The problem is you get to the trade deadline, if the team is in a good position in the standings, going to make the playoffs, you start trying to make moves and you really hinder the chemistry on the team, and the team then could go backwards and not have the type of finish that you need to have. So, and I think there's more value can be gained in return in making moves for these guys right now. I think Lindholm right now and Hanifin are two guys that they can probably get a pretty good return for when you consider the free agent market for this year with regard to high name players is not nearly as good as it has been in the past. So if these guys are available in trade, there's going to be a number of teams that would be interested in, particularly those two guys, and even Toffoli after the outstanding season that he had this year. So I'm sure right now the Flames management is busy trying to get those things sealed up as they get set to head to the NHL draft in Nashville.
Yeah, and I know there's a report today from Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic, and he is reporting that Noah Hanifin has no intention of extending his contract, and now that explains why his name is out there. I don't know if that, the fact that he, won't extend, if that hurts your leverage or whatever. It's too bad because I like him as a defenseman. He's certainly, he's still young. Like he is still a young defenseman with a lot of experience. And Elias Lindholm, those are the two names you brought up. If you don't have Lindholm, all of a sudden you become very thin down the middle. And now, you finding number one centermen in this league are not easy. And, I think Elias Lindholm is a number one centerman. I don't know if he's, in the top 10 or however you want to debate it. But for the Calgary Flames, he's definitely a number one center.
Yeah, no question about that. No question. I think they've got to try their hardest to get him signed. I would say the same thing for Hanifin, but maybe not as much. But Hanifin would, of course, be a big loss to the team, and it sounds as though that he's not going to be willing to sign to a long-term agreement here. So if that's the case, and you're hearing his name out there quite prominently in the last few days in trade speculation, but Lindholm is a guy you definitely, the Flames do have a number of other defensemen on the roster and also within their system that are going to be around for training camp this year. So it may not hurt as much to lose him, although I certainly would like to keep him. But Lindholm is a guy you've really got to focus on and try to convince him to stay here with this team. Now, in addition to the management, coaching staff, that situation all being settled, and Lindholm can make a decision with regard to that. The other thing is that Lindholm, I think, has to be in his own mind confident that this team can be a contender for the Stanley Cup. And, that I'm sure his agents are very quietly going about seeing what other teams are interested. And within that group, seeking to see if maybe down the road, that might be a better team for him to go to that would have a better chance for the Cup. So the Flames, in addition to having management and coaching staff in there that maybe is acceptable, Lindholm have to convince them that the team itself is going to be a contender, and not only for this coming year, but for the years beyond that as well. So it's a real sell job that has to be done to convince him to remain here with the team. But as I say, if they can't do that right away here now, between now and the end of the month, then it's time to move them on for sure.
Outside of Nevada, I would suggest that this was a somewhat of a disappointing Stanley Cup final, or maybe forgettable Stanley Cup final. But Vegas wins it 6 years into the league. Credit them. And they do it with some original players. They do it with Jack Eichel, who that becomes a really incredible story now, right? The guy behind Connor McDavid, who was injured and Buffalo didn't want him to get, the surgery that he got. A lot of credit to this Vegas organization, Peter.
Yeah, there's no question. They did a wonderful job putting that team together, and they made a whole bunch of changes. Even the first year they're in the league, they get to the final. Then after that, they make a whole bunch of other changes and augment their lineup. And they took a gamble on Eichel, or where the Buffalo didn't want him to have that surgery. They wouldn't endorse it, so he did it on his own. And of course, then a number of other teams were a little bit leery of signing him after having that major surgery that he had. But Vegas was willing to take a chance on him, and he turned out to be one of their top players in the playoffs. And it's another interesting aspect of it, and I think I mentioned it the last time I was on, is that there were more Canadian players on the Vegas team than any other team that was in the playoffs. And when I was making my bold prediction on the Stanley Cup Final, I had to decide between Matthew Tkachuk's Florida Panthers or those many Canadian players that were on the Vegas team. So I hedged toward Vegas, and it turns out now I'm right in 8 of the 16 playoff series that we had this year. So I didn't have a great record, but at least we got the final right. And it goes back. Rob, I was talking the last time I was on here about this deal about just get into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting, because I always was under the impression that you have to have a good team, even if to have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And Vegas winning the Cup kind of steered me back into that direction, that I'd rather have a team that is really good rather than the team that just makes the playoffs. Now, there is exceptions where teams that just make the playoffs go on and win the Stanley Cup, as St. Louis Blues did in 2018, and the Los Angeles Kings did with Daryl Sutter as coach in 2012. But very, very rarely does a team that's not among the top 8 or 10 in overall standing in the NHL win the Cup. And this past season, Vegas finished 5th overall, the number 1 team within their own division, and ultimately they went on to win the Cup. Now, Florida, of course, was an outstanding Cinderella story, the fact that they barely get into the playoffs. In fact, they had 1 less point than the Flames had, but they got themselves into the playoffs and then went on a tremendous run, upsetting 3 teams and getting into the final before they kind of had nothing left to defend against a team like Vegas that was so deep in depth, both on forwards and defense. And of course, they win with a goaltender from Calgary, who was, I think, their 4th string goaltender when the season started. So definitely an incredible story for the Vegas team to go on and win the Stanley Cup. And I'm starting to think, if you're building a team, build to win. Don't build to just get in. Now, if you just get in, you'll take it. You'll take it. But I think you've got a better chance to win it all if you have one of the better teams during the regular season.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, Peter, because I love the Adin Hill story. But again, not a guy that anybody thought about at the beginning of the year as a difference maker, but he finds himself there and he is a difference maker. But we were always told you build a team from the goaltender out. Like, is one of the craziest things that people are going to forget is that Jonathan Quick now has 3 Stanley Cup rings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? Like, I forgot all about him, and then he's on the ice getting this moment with the cup, and I'm like, holy cow. Remember how mad he was to go to Columbus? Like, they pissed him off, and then the Columbus flips him to Vegas, and now he's got a cup ring, right?
And Vegas only took them as goaltending insurance because they were having all these injuries to the other guys and were fearful they might have more. And he ends up being a guy on the ice lifting the Stanley Cup above his head, although he didn't play in the final or any of the playoffs, I guess. But he was a member of that team after being basically the Kings gave up on him and Columbus gave up on him. So, another really amazing story.
But did he not have an incredible run until Calgary knocked him off during the regular season? Didn't he? He got hot, Jack, didn't he?
Yeah, he came in and played a bit, I think, and then the Flames.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did have a good run there. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. When he got in there, had a real solid run there of victories or non-losses. So, he was playing really well when he went there. And it was hard to believe that LA, who was in a playoff run as well, even though they had another goalie that was playing better than him, didn't keep him around just in case. So, I tell you just never know about these things. And and you always say, the team that has the best goaltender is going to win. The way it went this year, not necessarily so.
But I don't know if this is it 2010, the Niemi? No, is it Leighton and who was the goalie with Chicago? Was it Niemi?
Crawford?
No, it was before Crawford.
So before.
You remember it was Chicago and Philadelphia. It was Michael Leighton in Philadelphia. And I want to say
it was Niemi.
Antti Niemi, right? in that Stanley
Yes,
Cup
yes,
final.
Jeff Dude was. Yes, yep.
And then
yep.
they walked away from Niemi. Like they
That's
walked away from him. He ended up in San Jose that year, right?
That's
So-
right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So you just never know about these things. You know, as you say, you can win saying, well, the team with the best goalie is going to win, but sometimes that's not always the case. So there's always
Depth
really
on
strange things that develop.
Depth
That's
on
why
the
they
blue
play
line.
the game, Rob.
That's why they play the game, Pete. Depth on the blue line. You can never have enough depth on the blue line. We are about a week away, too, from Hall of Fame now, the Hockey Hall of Fame selections, correct?
Yes, next Wednesday, the group gets together in Toronto, the 18-member panel to select the 2023 candidates to be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Now, of those 18 voters, they have to have 75% of the vote to gain at least 75% of the vote to gain entry into the Hall of Fame. So it's going to be interesting to see how things go next Wednesday when Lanny McDonald, of course, who is the chairman of the Hall of Fame, will be in there making phone calls to the people that have been selected for the Hall of Fame this year. And of course, when I look at it as two guys with the Flames that I think have been overlooked a number of times now. And hopefully this time they get the call. One of them is Mike Vernon, two-time Stanley Cup winner, winning with the Flames here in '89 and also winning with Detroit when he won the Conn Smythe Trophy as MVP. He could have been the MVP of the Flames win in '89 as well. As I understand it, he lost by only one vote to teammate Al McInnes when the Flames won that cup in '89. And of course, the other is Theo Fleury, who I believe now has been rejected 11 times by the Hockey Hall of Fame. To me, I always had a strong feeling that Theo was worthy of the Hall of Fame, but he was overlooked. But when all these times, but the year that Paul Kariya was elected into the Hockey Hall of Fame, that's when I became totally convinced that Theo belongs in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He has better credentials. Nothing wrong with what Paul Kariya accomplished during his career, but Jerome's credentials are much better. And nonetheless, he's been overlooked. In fact, an interesting stat here is that of the players in the NHL who played over 1,000 regular season games and also over 100 playoff games, the only player, there are 11 players in that group in the NHL. And the only one of that 11 that's not in the Hockey Hall of Fame is Theo Fleury. So hopefully that will be on the table when they meet in Toronto next Wednesday and take that into consideration. It seems like this is going to be a year. They haven't selected many goaltenders to the Hall in recent times. Last year they had Luongo come in as a Hall of Famer, and many are expecting that Henrik Lundqvist could be a first ballot Hall of Famer because he's eligible for the first time this year. So that's a possibility. And other people are also pushing for Curtis Joseph to get into the Hall of Fame. And as I mentioned, we've got Mike Vernon, a guy that's been overlooked several times as well. So those are the ones that I'm looking at that have the opportunity on the Flames situation. And also among the forwards, I think it's about time they had Alexander McGinley into the Hall of Fame. He's been rejected 14 times now. And this is a guy that had a remarkable career. Now, I don't know if this is a fact, so I'm going to preface my comment with that. Some people have suggested that the reason why he's never been elected to the Hall of Fame is that he won't go to the Hall of Fame ceremony. Now, I don't know, as I say, if that is true or not. Even if it is true, I don't think it's a good reason not to induct him to the Hall of Fame. He certainly has the credentials for that. Others that will be in the running, I'm sure, are Pierre Turgeon. He's been rejected 12 times. You've got Henrik Zetterberg, most valuable player in 2008 in the Stanley Cup playoffs, cup winner several times with Detroit. Rod Brindamore, the coach of the Carolina Hurricanes, is a player that I think has a shot at getting in. And, a guy that's on the ballot for the first time, that might be a possibility, is another former Flame in Jay Bouwmeester. This is a guy that he's a Triple Crown winner. He's won a World Championship, he's won a Olympic gold medal, and he's won a Stanley Cup. So, going to be real interesting to see what comes out of that. And of course, on the women's side, you've got Jennifer Botterill, who we see often on television on the Sportnet coverage. She is a 3-time gold medal winner in the Olympics. and also has got 5 gold medals for the World Championships, twice the most valuable player. We've got Megan Duggan of from the United States, who won 7 World Championships with the U.S. team, and of course there's Carolyn Ouellette, a 3-time gold medal winner for Canada. So it's going to be real interesting there. Among the builders, you might have a guy that might maybe a former Flame assistant general manager, David Poyle, could be in the running. He's retiring now as the general manager of the Nashville Predators. And when the Flames came to Calgary, he was the assistant GM of the Flames to Cliff Fletcher, and he had served with Cliff a number of years in Atlanta as well. Then he went on to be a general manager in Washington, and then general manager in Nashville. So he's been around the NHL for about 40 years in a managerial situation. So I think he would be a guy that could get himself inducted as a builder. And, it wouldn't surprise me if not, maybe not this year, but down the road, that the Flames majority owner, Murray Edwards, is a guy that's considered for the building role in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
I think he will be because of his work in the the creation of the CBA, right? He guided the last 2, did he not?
Yes, he did. Yep. So I've got a real strong feeling that if not this year, down the road, Murray's going to be a guy that's going to be inducted as a builder.
And I know the Hall of Fame's always a hot topic, and everybody's got hot takes on it. Pete, am I close? Like I'm here, I'm listening to you talk about Poyle, and I believe that absolutely David Poyle should be there. What about Al McNeil?
Yeah, Al would be a guy considered. He's been around the game a long, long time. He's a Stanley Cup winner as a coach with the Montreal Canadiens, and I think he won, I don't know how many American Hockey League championships he won as a coach when he was handling the Canadiens farm team there in Nova Scotia, and coach for he coached the Atlanta Flames as well as the Calgary Flames, and I would think that he's a guy that would be in the running in that coaches category. Although there's some others out there that would argue that Mike Keenan should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
a few other guys there.
Sure,
but,
no, I get it.
So that but Al certainly has put in his dues. He's still around the Flames, and even though he's not I don't think he's in a managerial capacity, he's still in there advising management, coaches, and that sort of thing, and has been doing, he's been part of management here since the Flames came, which either a coach or in management or around the team for 43 years, plus the other history that I talked about earlier. So I think he should have his name up for at least conversation among that group when they meet on Wednesday.
Yeah, I wish he would, because. And I part of it is it's not the NHL Hall of Fame, it's the Hockey Hall of Fame. And he's had an incredible impact on the game as a coach. You can probably tell this story better than I can, but did he not also play a fairly large role in Al MacInnis's development too?
Yes, he did. Very, very much. I mean, when Al MacInnis came to the Flames, he was a first-round draft pick and had some great credentials from playing in the Ontario Junior Hockey League. But his conditioning wasn't exactly the greatest, to say that in the very least. In fact, back in those days, the physical testing that the teams had was the players running around the Stampede Park racetrack.
Yeah.
And the day that Al MacInnis went out there, or the players with Al MacInnis, the first time he went out there, he couldn't finish that run around the track. And he'd be the first to admit that to you. But then, of course, Al McNeil was part of the Flames at that point. And, of course, Al was from Nova Scotia, Al McNeil and Al MacInnis also from Nova Scotia. And Al McNeil took Al MacInnis under his wing. And very soon after that, a year or two after that, he became one of the top conditioned Flame players every time they came to training camp, and had no trouble racing around the racetrack at Stampede Park. So that's how much of an influence he had on making Al MacInnis a Hockey Hall of Famer. And, of course, a Stanley Cup winner with the Flames, winner of the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the playoffs. He certainly had a lot to do with that, and very quietly had a lot to do with a lot of other players on the Flame team with his, a little bit of pointing this out, pointing that out, and making them better players. So,
and with the Canadians
guy
too,
that could be under consideration. Yep.
And with the Canadians too, he was around Guy Lafleur as a rookie, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah. Yes, he did. Yeah. So he was around an awful lot of good players that he groomed in the Montreal system. In fact, the very first hockey game that I ever broadcast, Rob, was at the old Memorial Gardens in Campbellton, New Brunswick, in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
The Nova Scotia Voyageurs came to Campbellton to the official opening of the renovated building. They had renovated it, and they came in for the official reopening of the building, which had been renovated. That was the first game that I broadcast. It was the Nova Scotia Voyageurs against the local team, the Campbellton Tigers. Al McNeil was coach and general manager of that Nova Scotia team, and his top player, his top defenseman, was Larry Robinson, who would, after that, would go on to play in the National Hockey League. So I remember that night, that time. And, but halfway through the game, Al had to loan the Tigers, had to trade some of his players to the Tigers to get the game close.
Okay. Little things you don't.
Broadcaster's nightmare. Now you got 10 players going from one team to the other, 10 go to the other team. So anyway, that was a funny little anecdote from my first time actually got involved with Al McNeil was back then in 1971.
See, I love
and
stuff
then later
like
he'd go on to be, great things with the Canadians and so on. So.
But I love stuff like that, Pete. Like people nowadays, sports is so buttoned down. But can you imagine, the Calgary Wranglers are going to go, up to Bentley and play the Generals, or, go to Brooks and play the Bandits or something like that, or like the Cannons, like the Mariners would come and play the Cannons here, right? Like,
yes, right. Yeah.
I love that stuff. I wish we had more of that stuff, right?
Yeah. And sort of the little nuances of not nuances, but particularly outstanding little things of the game that most people haven't ever heard about. So, but that was a very interesting time.
Do you remember the King and his court? Speaking of
baseball? I do. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And I was thinking
about still around. I think there's no, they're not still. I'm thinking of the basketball team, but you're talking about the softball team.
Yeah, I'm talking about the softball team, right?
Yeah, the picture there.
Yeah. I was thinking about him and Max Patkin. Remember the old Clown Prince of Baseball? And he'd do the minor league circuit. I know he'd come up to Edmonton and do a Trappers weekend or something like that, and he just goof around at first base and stuff. Like, I miss that stuff.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I saw them once. I saw them perform, and of course, the Harlem Globetrotters I've seen many times, a few times as well. But yeah, those are all unique things. But yeah, that was pretty amazing. Back in those days when they had that softball team come around or fastball team come around and play these local teams and so on. So, those are all real interesting little tidbits for the game.
And they're fun. Unfortunately, our last story is not fun. Tough, another tough week in the business that you and I love.
Yeah, Rob, we're seeing the news on a couple of days ago that 1,300 people were let go by Bell Media, and of course 6 radio stations that were owned by Bell Media. They're no longer in operation as they close them down completely, including the sports station in Edmonton, 1260, and of course Funny 1060 here in Calgary, which is a station that I didn't particularly listen to very much or often. Although I did listen to it a few times a couple of years ago when my granddaughter was doing traffic reports on that station in the afternoon. So anyway, but a very, very sad day to have that many people in the media business lose their jobs. Stations totally out of commission now, not even in operation. Others being shifted around in platforms and that sort of thing. It's really, really sad for radio. And this is a business that I grew up listening to. I can remember many nights listening to the radio, listening to hockey games, listening to Danny Gallivan on the radio broadcasting Canadians games, Foster Hewitt broadcasting Leaf games, and even getting Boston Bruin games on the radio in baseball, and New York Yankee games on the radio, then getting into the business myself and having the opportunity to work as many years. I think it was 48 years I worked in the radio business when you consider when I started back in my hometown when I was still going to high school, doing the morning and afternoon sports there. And without that, I wouldn't have had the career that I had. And now to see so many, and this is not the first time there have been reductions made in the sports world here among broadcasters. We've seen it happen both in radio and in television over the last little while. And hopefully we're not going to see any more for a long, long time. But it seems like that's the way things are going. And you have to be interested to see now if Rogers which has some stations here in Calgary, whether or not they might be following suit. And hopefully not, because you and I know a lot of people in the radio business here that are gainfully employed, doing outstanding jobs there. But you can notice now the trend. Many of the broadcasters, be it radio or television, are doing podcasts now. Some that are out of the business, such as you are, Rob, now into this podcast, doing an outstanding job with that and gaining more and more recognition as it goes. And other people, some of the television people that we see on Sportnet and TSN, they have podcasts going on now. So I guess they're kind of anchoring themselves in case there's their jobs are become not there anymore in the radio television field. So hopefully that's not going to be the case, but it does seem to be a trend that's been ongoing now for a while, and certainly was a big wake up call when that happened a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it a little later in the show, Pete, and I prefer not to go out on a negative, so let me ask you this. Did you say you did morning and afternoon sports while you were going to high school?
Yep, I go in the morning there, Rob, and I do the morning sports up until 8:30. It was a small town, so the school wasn't far away. So then I'd go to the high school and do my morning and afternoon classes. And then when that ended about 3:45, I'd head down to the radio station and do the sports at 5, 5:30, and 6. And so then I'd go home and study for the next day.
That's amazing. I love that. That's fantastic.
That's how I started in the business. And prior to that, how that got started was that I was doing the public address announcing of the local softball league there. They had a real senior softball league that had 4 teams. It was a big thing in the city. It gained a lot of interest, a lot of fans. So I lived nearby there, so I was doing the public address system of those games. And then finally, one of the players in the league was the radio station manager, Doug Young. And he came to me and he said, "Why don't you do reports on these games for the radio station?" So I would phone in reports to the radio station after the games were over. They'd run them in the morning. And then my last year of high school, he hired me to go in and be the sports guy. So that's where it started. And but for that, maybe I wouldn't be here today. But that's how it started, and fortunately, it went on to a lot of great things for me. And I'm very, very humbled for the fact that radio was so much part of my career. And now we're seeing, what we're seeing with regard to people being let go from these jobs. So we can only hope for the best there. But without radio, I might not be talking to you today, Rob.
And if the name Doug Young, the program director, seems familiar. He was.
Yes, he is a federal minister. Well, not anymore. He's retired now, but he was a federal minister of several different portfolios back in the 90s.
Yeah,
and I think you met him here in Calgary, and he was also at the Hall of Fame.
He was at the
2006.
That's right. When you got the Foster Hewitt. Oh, by the way, do you know who's directly responsible for this year's Foster Hewitt Award winner?
There's a committee selected of past.
No. That's
past broadcasters.
That's the wrong answer, Pete. The man who is completely responsible for this year's Foster Hewitt Award winner is hockey legend Perry Berezan.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes,
right.
Yes,
it's Dan Rusanowski of the San Jose Sharks, and Perry, when he was injured, did color with Dan in the first year, right? So.
I had forgot all about that. You're absolutely right.
Right? There's Perry Berezan making hockey better again. Directly responsible for this year's Foster Hewitt Award winner.
He'll have to be there for the ceremony in November.
If I'll be disappointed if Dan doesn't dedicate the award to Perry. That's the only logical thing to do.
I'm going to send Dan a note and recommend that he do that.
Absolutely.
And thanks for letting me know, because I'd forgotten all about that. I remember the old Cow Palace there in San Francisco, where they played their first couple of years. Perry was injured and he was doing color. That's right.
I just remember there's a story, and it's Perry's to tell. I really shouldn't. But anyway, I'm halfway through it anyway. They're working together, and Dan says, "Oh, and it's offside by the San Jose Sharks." And Perry goes, "No, Dan, that's actually icing," and everything. And Dan covered his mic, and Perry's mic, "Don't ever correct me." So, anyway, the little things that keep my little mind occupied. Pete, good to talk to you. We'll do it again in a couple of weeks, and we're going to have a lot to talk about then too.
Oh yeah, there's lots going on between now and then. That's for sure, Rob.
All
Take
right,
care
buddy.
and enjoy the weekend.
I will. Peter Maher, everybody, the legend.